Hello, BookTube. I was just Skyping with Steve Partridge about a whole bunch of other things, and when the Skyping session was ridiculous on its face because I was using my yoga book, and I had just Skyped all morning with someone else, so the yoga book was depleted in power, so it needed to have the power cord on in order to Skype at all. But the power cord for the yoga book is like 6 inches long, so it's useless. You can't use the thing while you're charging it, but I wanted to, so I had to slink down on the bed into some sort of. I was like Kate Winslet in Titanic. I was like telling Steve Partridge, Skype me like one of your French girls. That was ridiculous. But when we wrapped up that Skype, I was immediately thinking that it's Tag Tuesday. And Steve Partridge just made his very first tag, his very first original tag. So I thought I would do that now. It's the My Pleasure book tag, and it is set up around a whole bunch of life's sensory pleasures, because apparently that happens to anybody the minute they set foot in Berlin. It certainly happened to me. The first prompt is think, and the prompt is a book that made you think, comma, hard. And my first reaction to that was to say, slow down there, Seymour. Books don't make me think, comma, hard, or I'd be reviewing them for the Wall Street Journal. Life events make me think, comma, hard. I have found puppies crying in the rain, far away from any help, when I don't know what to do with them and aren't sure I can give them help myself. I have sat at the hospital bedside of a 6-year-old girl as she dies, because her parents don't have any idea that she's there and wouldn't care even if they did know. Life makes me think, comma, hard. Books don't. But if we stop at think, if we cut our losses and stop there, then I do have a book. It's a favorite of mine. I've recommended it on this channel before. It's The Education of Henry Adams, which he wrote at the beginning of the 20th century, and which is very odd. It is tough to classify. It's part autobiography, it's part extended essay, it's part stream of consciousness, and it's wholly remarkable. It is, in my opinion, one of the greatest works of nonfiction ever written by an American. And it always makes me think. I've read it I don't know how many times, and it always makes me think. I always find some facet of it that I didn't quite appreciate the last time I read it. And Adams's friends recognized that in the manuscript when he sent it around Samizdat style to his friends before he even thought about publishing it, because he wasn't sure what he had written. And you can definitely see why. His friends recognized that as well. It's a weird, sui generis thing, but I do strongly recommend it if you're looking for a book that's not exactly a walk in the Sunday park. Then the next prompt is love. And the prompt is a book that broke or mended your heart. And Steve Partridge's answer was The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And in this case, for the broke part of Broke My Heart, I certainly agree. since The Road broke my heart as a reader on virtually every page because of how absolutely god-awful it is. It's a post-apocalyptic novel in which a man is shepherding a boy across the post-apocalyptic wasteland, and it doesn't have an apocalypse. We don't ever learn why the world is the way it is. The way the world is totally inconsistent from one page to another. Cormac McCarthy didn't indulge in anything so tawdry as world building, even though he was writing a science fiction novel. So there isn't any world building, and because he's a minimalist, there isn't any character, there's barely any dialogue, there's no development of any kind, there's no dramatic arch whatsoever. The one thing that was on Cormac McCarthy's mind when he originally thought up the book was the idea of a light that burns inside good people, and can they recognize it in other good people, and what happens if someone with that light burning inside him is dying and needs to pass on something very important to other people with light inside them. Will he recognize it? Will he do it? The whole idea is absurd, of course, and the kind of quasi-mystical mumbo-jumbo that the dude bros love, and that's why they love this book. The other thing that was on his mind, a vague idea that was on his mind, is what if in one of these post-apocalyptic thingamajigs, this science fiction the kids like so much, what if a couple of characters stumbled upon a storehouse of supplies that somehow had eluded everyone else? What would that scene be like? And you might think, okay, so you get some fuzzy New Age idea about a light that burns inside good people, and you have one idea for a quasi-sort-of scene. You might think, that isn't enough to make a novel, and you'd be right. But By the same token that the Road by Cormac McCarthy breaks my heart, my heart is then mended by a book that came out in the same year and is also dystopian, if not post-apocalyptic, and that's World War Z, the War and Peace of zombie novels, the greatest zombie novel conceivable, that takes you through step by step what would happen if a zombie plague struck the Earth. In modern day, without any laser weapons or last-minute saves or anything like that, and it is wonderful, just rereadably wonderful, and does give you lots and lots of world building, and crosses its own T's and dots its own I's. And you shouldn't. This is a case where I'm often going to bat for movie adaptations on this channel, and I do very much recommend the movie adaptation of World War Z, but it's one of the rare cases where the movie adaptation is unrecognizable from the book. So if you've seen the movie World War Z, I'm assuming that you liked it. There's not much there not to like in every register and in every kind of action scene. But if you've seen it and you think that you've seen a version of the book, you haven't. So if you haven't read the book, you really should. I do recommend it. Then prompt number 3 is Eat, a book that nourishes you. And I have one. It's an old book. It's 100 years old, and I love it. It's Bliss Perry's Park Street Papers. And it's just a collection of essays and reflections on his time at the Atlantic Monthly, when the Atlantic Monthly was based in Boston, and not just in Boston, but in a lovely old building on Park Street, whose every room and basement and garret and hallway I have been in many, many times. And it's just Perry's reflections on what the magazine was like then, what it was like to look out of the editorial offices on Boston Common, what it was like for towering literary figures to walk in and out the door. Just delightful. I mean, the Park Street Papers is long gone. You might be able to get it as a download or a PDF, but in order to get this book, you would have to have access to, well, online, if copies are available online. But if you were to in order to encounter this serendipitously, you would have to have access to a used bookstore like the Brattle here in Boston, which, and not everybody does, but I love it. I absolutely love it. And nourishing is a perfect word for the portrait that it gives of a literary era that is now long gone and will never come back. Not to say that modern versions won't be every bit as interesting, but there is a kind of nourishment in going back to the roots. Then prompt number 4 is Laugh, a book that brought a little comic relief. And for this, I want to recommend a big fat novel that I'm afraid I don't have a copy to show you, because every time I get a copy, I send it to somebody. It's The Bestseller by Olivia Goldsmith, which is her gigantic novel. It's like 600 pages long, about the bestseller list, about the literary world. She was one of those writers like Jilly Cooper or Penny Vincenzi who tell these big, sumptuous, lavish, popular fiction novels that are easy for snobs to dismiss completely out of hand without ever reading a page of them, and that are so smart that they always reward smart readers who aren't snobs, who pick them up and read them, expecting mere escapism and getting more than that. And this is Olivia Goldsmith wrote a whole bunch of novels before she died. And unfortunately, she died early. She died an untimely, unexpected death in a twist that is straight out of an Olivia Goldsmith novel. She died as a complication of plastic surgery, which is just the sort of thing she would write about. And she brings to this book a level of insider insight and also black humor that there's a thread of black humor that runs throughout the book, and it is memorably well done, including 2 of the book's awful characters. The book has a number of awful characters, a number of wonderful characters too, but 2 of the most awful characters in the book. This is not, searing contemporary modern fiction where the awful characters aren't going to get their comeuppance, where they're very markedly aren't going to get their comeuppance because, hey, we're all suffering here in Brooklyn. No, this is a popular novel where the good guys are, in some sense or other, not pie in the sky, but in some sense or other going to get rewarded, and the bad guys are, in some sense or other, going to get their comeuppance, and the comeuppance, the fates that Olivia Goldsmith devises for these 2 rotten characters, their final scenes each are just laugh out loud funny. I mean, the whole book's wonderful, but I was waiting. The whole first time I read it, I was waiting the whole time to see how she was going to deal with these two characters that she had so perfectly created, and I wasn't disappointed. Unfortunately, I can recommend the book, but I can't send it to anybody because I don't have a copy. Every time I see a copy, I grab it, and most of the times that I grab it, I then indulge myself in rereading it to enjoy it all over again, but then I send it to somebody, so I don't have a copy now. Let's see here. The next one is number 5 is Sex, which I'm told can be a pleasure. And that is a book that explores or contains sexuality, but that doesn't make you cringe. And that description is well taken because, as we mentioned on this channel, and other people have mentioned it on their channels, it usually does. I, myself, am not a big fan, not a fan at all, of having actual sex in fiction. Sexual charge, sure. Sexual chemistry, sure. Sexual dalliance, sure. But the actual act, authors just consistently keep trying to put it in their fiction narratives when it does not belong. You will never learn anything about any of the characters in such a scene. They will never learn anything about each other in such a scene. Everything about fiction, the whole operation of fiction, stops at the door and then resumes once everything's over. I've never understood why authors don't see that. But in terms of a sexual atmosphere, sexual charge, I do have a recommendation, and it's a little bit complicated, of course, because it took place in the shadow of a plague. But it's a series of books edited by George Stambolian. It's Men on Men, an old series, an anthology series of gay fiction that started when the AIDS epidemic was in full swing and when there was no future, when there was no small glimmer of hope, and Stambolian enlisted a lot of great gay writers, many of whom went on to become titans in their own right. For instance, this first one has Dennis Cooper, Robert Farrow, Brad Gooch, Michael Grumley, Andrew Holleran, Ethan Morden, Felice Picano, Edmund White, all in one volume. And the first this series went on for like into the double digits, 12 or 13 or 15 even. In my opinion, the installments got worse as they went along. But the first 4 or 5 are not only charged with sexuality, which is this prompt, but also beautifully capture an age in a way that certainly was not the intent. That wasn't Stambolian's only intent was really good stories, any really good story that he could get his hands on. But they manage it anyway. So if you are in a used bookstore and you see these and you're wondering, what are they? Are they any good? The covers they look dated. Maybe this is just cringy. It's not. The first 3 or 4 or 5 volumes in this series, I enormously recommend if you read gay fiction. Then the next prompt is Rest. And my God, you should have seen Steve Partridge's face when he got to this prompt. He was like, even the word rest made him happy. And then he went on some sort of digression about how he loves naps. And I'm sure I'm going to hear that from the rest of you because apparently BookTube is entirely populated by 90-year-olds. Rest is evil. Okay? I'm not going to go on the rant about how you have about 10 minutes left to live, but rest is evil. Naps are evil. Okay? Maybe once a year. But looking forward to it, rapturously hoping for it, please. You have almost no time, and you have a lot to do that you haven't yet done. But anyway, indulging the tag and the tag maker. The prompt is a book that gives you peace, reflection, or just calms you down. And I actually do have a book that fits that description. It's a classic. I've recommended it on this channel before. I would love to recommend it again. This is Wyman Richardson's The House on Nauset Marsh, with illustrations by Henry Bugby Keene. This is going on 100 years old. It was essays that he did and then collected in a book about life at a farmhouse in Cape Cod. An old Cape Cod, a Cape Cod that had no mega mansions. It had no... it was cut off in the winter. It was a frontier. It wasn't really a boutique travel place yet when he did this. And it's wonderful. These essays these pieces, these vignettes are wonderful about just the simple down-home pleasures of living rough in an unweatherized farmhouse with a fireplace and going fishing and catching your own food and keeping an eye on the weather. And It is wonderful. And Henry Bugby Keene's illustrations are wonderful as well. He does spot illustrations all throughout and then full page illustrations just periodically throughout the book. And I want to read you a bit. We're at 14 minutes. We have a little time. I want to read you a bit. This is the final vignette from the book, called Bedtime. The day is done. The supper things have all been washed and put away. The kerosene lamp on the dining table gives off a soft yellow glow that highlights the geese on the walls and leaves deep shadows in the corners. In the fireplace, an oak fire is quietly burning, which, together with the lamp, radiates enough heat to keep the low-ceilinged living room reasonably warm. We sit by the fire and talk tonight about nothing very serious. We feel comfortably tired after our exertions of the day, comfortably fed, and comfortably warm. The mantel clock ticks quietly on and suddenly strikes 10 in a characteristically erratic way. First one person, then another yawns, stretches, departs for bed, until at last only the old man himself is left. Finally, even he gets up from his chair, takes his last weather observation, checks up on the kitchen stove, and puts out the lamps. Being the last to go, he can enjoy the luxury of leisurely undressing before the warmth of the dying fire. By slowly turning around and around, he thoroughly toasts himself. At last, however, he can procrastinate no longer. He puts on the fire screen, dashes rapidly into his bedroom, and takes the desperate plunge between the ice-cold sheets. This is a vanished world. I knew it well. Through the open living room door, he can see dancing light and shadows and hear quiet sounds as the fire burns down. From the pantry comes a barely audible scratching, indicating that the pantry mouse is busily engaged in finding himself some supper. Outside, there is a slight rustling as a light breeze stirs the cedars, while the sudden barking of a dog suggests that Mr. Fox is bothering someone's chickens. Rest now, little farmhouse. Your flock is safely in bed and sound asleep. Thank you for the wonderfully good times you have given us. Good night. I love this book, and I go to it for calming down, for a renewal, all the time, especially since I'm in a period in my life now that I once upon a time thought was unthinkable, where I don't go to the Cape every summer. There was a time when that was just an absolute given. Pack up your life and go to the Cape. Open up the house, air it out, reacquaint yourself with the slower and more peaceful rhythms of Cape Cod. And I don't do that anymore, so I do it through this book. It was kind of funny. Yesterday, I had the quintessential Steve book, The Grand Strategy of the Habsburg Empire. And I said that friends of mine always make fun of me for quintessential Steve books. And one friend of mine emailed me and said, the only way that book could be more of a Steve book if it was about the grand strategy of the Habsburg Empire and their summers at Cape Cod. But anyway, the last prompt is experience. And that is a book that introduced you to a new subject or shifted your perspective. And my answer is a little predictable. A lot of people are becoming fascinated by this subject, but I can't help it. It infinitely fascinates me. And it's quantum mechanics. And the book is Spooky Action at a Distance, which is the English language translation of the German phrase that Albert Einstein used about a quality of quantum mechanics that looked to be inevitable from the initial, elaborations at Copenhagen, which is that two particles that are in a wave synchronicity will share that synchronicity and any changes in it instantaneously over any distance, which seems to violate not only Einstein's contention that nothing can happen faster than the speed of light, but also basic physical presumptions like causality. If the speed of light no longer applies, then cause need no longer necessarily precede effect. Stuff like that, the whole of the quantum world, endlessly fascinates me, and this is my favorite book on the subject for raw beginners. And that's it. That is the My Pleasure book tag. Kudos to C. Partridge for coming up with a winner. He tagged a whole bunch of great people, and I want to tag a bunch of people myself. I want to tag Olive, Edibook Olive. I want to tag Jason Purcell, dipping his toe back into booktube, and I'd love to hear his answers. Michael at Catalyst Reads. I don't think Steve Partridge tagged you, but I would love to hear your answers. Britta shares my fascination with quantum mechanics, and probably has lots of other fascinating answers. Mark at Richardson Reads, who practically lives in the house on Nauset Marsh. I mean, they have the amenities, they have the plasma screen TV, but I have a feeling that he would know that he could walk into Wyman Richardson's house 100 years ago and be perfectly at home. Roz at Journey Through Books. I want to remember to tag you all the time. And Between Lines in Life, I don't think I've ever tagged you before, and I want to tag you for this one. This is a lot of fun. And that's it. I'm gonna wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.